So in economics, there are 6 major schools of economic thought. There's the classical, monetarist, Keynesian, Marxist, and Austrian. I'd just like to point out with the Keynesian school, it was developed in the 1930s, and it's based on debt and government spending. The Keynesians believe that in a recession is caused by consumers not demanding enough and not spending enough. So they figure the only way to help the economy is for someone to spend money. And since no one else can print money out of thin air, that is the job of the government. So the government's there to print money and spend money to help the economy. So that's what the Keynesians believe. About the Marxist school, people tend to be afraid of that term. It's sometimes used to intimidate people when you call someone a Marxist, but Marxist thought has really crept into our society. And Karl Marx emphasized class conflict. He believed that the rich were always exploiting the poor. So the rich got richer and the poor got poorer, was his mentality. And we can see that today, a lot of times politicians talk about rich people as the only ones who will get their taxes raised. We won't raise taxes for the middle class, only those who are rich. Well, how do people get rich? They get rich by making money through selling something that consumers want. They're benefiting society, and they're helping society. So why should we target them? So that's something that sometimes comes up in society, and that's Marxism. When you talk about the rich constantly exploiting the poor, so that's the class conflict. I'm going to take a couple minutes here and talk about some terms related to Marxism. I think there's a lot of confusion over the word socialism. What does socialism mean? Well, socialism basically means state ownership of all factors of production. That means that the government controls businesses and companies in production. Socialism is not an end of itself. Socialism is always the means to communism. Socialism will always lead to communism. And that brings us to Marxism. Well, what is Marxism? What does that have to do with communism? Well, Marxism is more of a worldview. It's a way of looking at the whole world. Economics, literature, history, politics, everything. It's kind of the philosophical support and reasoning for communism. Marxism backs communism, and they look at everything, all areas of life, to explain why we need communism. So that's those words, and I think people use them a lot today and don't really realize what they mean. Today we're going to be talking about the Austrian School of Economics, which is the only truly free market school. Karl Menger and Eugene von Baum-Bawerk were some of the earliest Austrians. It's called the Austrian School because they and others lived in Austria. It grew out of the classical school, and one of the founders and giants of the school is Ludwig von Mises, who lived in Austria in the late 1800s to early 1900s. During his lifetime, he never compromised on what he believed. He actually fled his homeland, fled to America in his 60s. He barely knew English. He had no friends here, but he fled because he was afraid to stay in Austria and have Hitler take over the country and tell him what to do. He knew that he could never compromise on his beliefs and pander to Hitler as some of his colleagues were willing to do. So he left everything he had to stand for his convictions. The Austrian school is about human action and real-world information. The Austrians ask, why should we translate meaningful information about the world into hard-to-understand mathematical formulas? Sometimes math is helpful in economics, but it's certainly not the basis of it. The basis is human action and unpredictable, unique individuals. We can never put that into a mathematical formula. The Austrians have also contributed some very important ideas to economics. F.A. Hayek won the Nobel Prize for his work on the business cycle, which he did in the 1920s under the direction of Ludwig von Mises. Von Mises also predicted the fall of Soviet Russia. He did this in a very unique way. While others predicted that Soviet Russia would fall through moral or political reasons, he believed that socialism was economically unsustainable, and the collapse of Soviet Russia proved him correct. To understand economics, we have to understand money, because money is the basis of economics and our economy. Money is not real wealth, and I think people have a major misunderstanding with that. Financial wealth is measured by what one can acquire with money, and not the quantity of money itself. For example, let's say that you're afraid that there's going to be a coming economic collapse and disaster in the United States, so you want to prepare for that. So you stock up on gold. You believe that's the safest way to prepare for such a disaster. And the disaster strikes, and you have this gold. Now the government has confiscated your neighbor's wealth, and there's nothing in the stores, the shelves are empty. Well, what are you going to do with your gold? You can't really eat it. There's nothing you can buy with it. You're not really concerned about making jewelry in the time of disaster. So basically, if there's nothing to buy with your gold, then it's worthless, and that applies to all money. Money developed from bartering and developed into a general medium of exchange. On your outline, you can see there's down at the bottom different people with what they have and what they want. And there's a problem, as you can see, because the person who has eggs and wants shoes can't find someone who has shoes and wants eggs. So they have to go about it in a roundabout way. And that's called indirect exchange, where you trade your product for something else, not because you want that other thing, but because you're going to trade it for something that you actually want. So let's say that in this instance, butter became the general medium of exchange. Everyone valued butter, and everyone was willing to take butter. That would become the money. Now, a general medium of exchange must be scarce, it must be durable, and it must have a relatively high value per unit. Now, in some isolated cases, this is not true, but if you want your money to last over a long time and in a large area, it must have these conditions. Now, why must money be scarce? Well, the more money you have, the less purchasing power it has. So the more dollars there are, the less you can buy with each dollar. That's why inflation is a bad thing, because it ruins the value of our money. Then we have to turn our attention to fiat currencies, which have developed entirely different. Fiat currencies are money because the government says we have to use it. It's not because the society and the consumers all value it. It's simply because the government tells us to use it. Genghis Khan was one of the first people to do this in the late 1270s. He had taken out an enormous amount of debt, didn't have enough money to pay it back, so he forced those who he owed money to accept his own money. And being Genghis Khan, no one was going to argue with him about that. And unfortunately, that's what we have now. We have fiat currency that has no value except that the government tells us we must use it. Fiat currencies have no value besides being money. When you have the dollar in your pocket, you're not going to use it for anything besides money, really, unless you have enough of it to wallpaper your house, which hopefully we won't come to. The problem with fiat currencies is they can become easily inflated. That means that the government can easily increase the supply of it and ruin the value of it. So that's what our money is like now, unfortunately.